whenever I want to get in an argument, I use the Bible.
Mm-hmm.
And I always quote Corinthians, where St. Paul tells the women of the church to listen to their husbands and to wear veils in church.
Yeah.
And of course they tell me, well, that was the custom of that time. At what point do we interpret the Bible, read the Bible, and say, well, that's literally the Word of God? Well, that's not what he really meant. Is the Bible literal and what he says he meant?
Yeah, but you have to read it in context.
Take that passage there when St. Paul speaks to the women.
Oh, well, that's very clear. I don't see any problem with it. It's perfectly within the context of the Bible, because in another part of his letters he says, "Mulieres taceant in ecclesias," women should shut up in church, and I perfectly agree. Wherever they don't, they cause a mess. But
you're not going to make friends this way, you know that.
Non veni pacem mittere sed gladium, Christ said. I did not come to bring the peace, but the sword.
So that passage of them wearing veils, how did we start the custom, not the custom, how did we allow the custom of not wearing veils?
Well, the fact that St. Paul wants veils is something that is a matter of discipline, obviously. Women wearing veils in church are following a discipline. It's something that you can reinforce in countries that have never stopped doing it for more than 10, 20 years. I'm not talking about what happened after the Council, because after the Council almost everything Catholic went out the window. The very window that John the 23rd opened, but to let in fresh air. Well, he let in Satan. But to give you an example, in Austria, where I usually live and I'm coming from, a very infelicitous emperor called Joseph II dared to abolish the veil for women, which was a perfectly unjust action and needed not to be followed, but people followed it anyway. So now it's about 200 years ago that the veil was abolished, and you cannot force it on women again because of customs. You know the law of customs? Now something done, something that is against the law cannot be custom, but then it has been done in the belief that they are doing right. And the church never interfered. The church did not come up and did not speak up in the 19th century saying you have to put the veil back on. So silently the church approved it, and it's gone in Austria. And it's very, it wouldn't be very, let's say, not very prudent if a priest was trying to enforce it. What you should do is invite women to go back to the tradition that St. Paul wants anyway. But we're talking about disciplinary matters, and you bring up...
I have a problem with
Yeah, go ahead.
That's my problem. If we take that, does that mean that someone out of ignorance about the new Mass, communion in the hands, the new consecration, because they are ignorant of it, therefore they're not held responsible for it?
Yeah, except that that would be true if communion in the hand and the new Mass were a mere question of discipline.
But they think that it's okay because the church has not ruled that it's...
Well, we're not judging these people anyway. We're not judging anybody, because subjective judgment is not within our competence.
But in the comparison of the veil as discipline and then communion in the hands...
Yeah, but the veil is not a sacrament.
Communion in the hands is not a sacrament.
Oh yes, it's a sacrament distributed. It is, and how? Now, you bring up a very important point. Going back to the definition of infallibility of Vatican I, there is a very, very important line. When the infallibility of the Pope is defined, they say that he has not the infallibility, it's the definition on the papal infallibility, but it's talking also about the primacy the Pope enjoys. Now the papal primacy, the document says, does not pertain only to things of the faith and morals. Non solum rebus fidei et morum, sed etiam disciplina and regiminis ecclesiae. It does not only apply to matters of faith and moral, but also to matters of discipline and government of the church. the papal primacy does. Not the infallibility, obviously, but the papal primacy. Now, why does the Conciliar document bother to make that distinction, saying, which in Latin is a lot clearer than it can ever be in English, non solum fide et morum, not just matters of faith and morals, saying thus, well, that's understood anyway, but also matters of discipline and government of the Church. Because the papal primacy applies to matters of discipline and government of the Church, not the infallibility. The Pope can bind his successors in matters of faith and morals. He can never bind his successors in matters of discipline and government of the Church. For example, the Pope binds all of his successors in everything that he defines. But he also binds his successors in his ordinary magisterium. When Pope Paul VI decided that artificial contraception is not to be used and is immoral, he said the same thing that Pius XI said, Pius XII said, and he said the same thing that future popes, hopefully, will say, because they're bound by it. But when Pope Pius X changed the law of the conclave, and then Pope Pius XII changed the law of the conclave, and then Pope Paul VI changed the law of the papal election, the conclave, and then the present Pope 2 years ago changed the law of papal election, they could do so freely because they're not bound by it. It's a mere question of discipline. Papal election is a matter of administration. Wearing a veil on your hat or not, like for us, not entering into church covered, wearing a hat, or I saying Mass, entering the church to say Mass with my beretta, is a matter of discipline. The rite of Mass is not a matter of discipline. We're not only talking about a sacrament. There are 7 sacraments in the Church. And St. Thomas Aquinas says 6 of these sacraments lead towards the 7th, the highest and most important of all, and that's the most blessed Eucharist. So we're not only dealing with a sacrament, we are dealing with the most important sacrament. But we are not only dealing with the most important sacrament, we are dealing with the foundation of the faith. See, the oldest liturgical law is lex orandi, lex credendi. The law of what has to be prayed will determine the law of what has to be believed. It's not the other way around. Historically, it's the other way around. If you want to look at the Church from the viewpoint of a mere historian, you will say, okay, first the Immaculate Conception was believed and we had a certain text for Mass, a proper in the Missal. Then the Immaculate Conception was defined and the text of Mass changed, historically. Yes. But the average faithful, and that includes me in that case, we believe the Immaculate Conception because it's celebrated December 8th. We hear about it at Mass, and I read the text of Mass when I say Mass. And that's why I believe in the Immaculate Conception, and not the other way around. The law of what has to be prayed will determine the law of what has to be believed. So Mass is not only a foundation of the faith, it's the foundation of the faith.